we were in Fort Lauderdale for a couple years together, and then he left me. No, I'm just kidding. But it was good to get to kind of know him when we were there, and just kind of build a little bit of bond. And then he came up here, so if we were praying for him, and then eventually our family just moved up here about a year and a half ago. So it's good to be here, and good to be here because he's talked about you guys a lot. So it's finally good to be with y'all. If you have your Bibles, we're going to be in Matthew chapter 5. So we're going to start in verse 10, Matthew 5 verse 10, and we're going to be talking about what I call a faith that won't be hidden, faith that cannot be hidden. And I always think, man, there's so many great examples of faith like in God's word. And even listening to like the announcements and what Dennis was just talking about for you guys and all the ways that you're reaching out, like to me, that's powerful from what you guys have here at Calvary New Life. But there's so many great examples, but I'm always asking myself, like when I read or when I hear a message or something, like, okay, God, so what is it though that you have for my life? Because there's like a call for Calvary New Life, but there's also a specific call for each one of us that God's saying, like, but also specifically, personally, in your individual context, here's what I'm doing, or here's what I want to do with you. And so I just pray that even as we dive in today, even as I was told, you guys just finished Revelation, which is amazing. So he asked me, he's like, what do you want to talk about? And I'm like, I really feel like, just talking about being salt and light and really getting out there into the world, because as we all know, time is winding up. And he said, man, I said, in light of Revelation 22, I was thinking about that. And he said, perfect. That'd be perfect, because that's where we're going. So again, no matter how old you are, no matter how, I say young you are, or how seasoned you are, there's always something that God has for us. And so I kind of want to walk through that and talk about what it means to have a faith that's noticed, a faith that's not hidden, not just a faith of words, but what does it mean to have a faith of action? So I want to dive in, but before we do that, let's just pray, and then we'll read scripture. Lord, I thank you for this day, and I just thank you for being able to be here. Lord, it's awesome to meet new people, God, but fellow believers that we'll spend eternity with, and just how you're using, Lord, everyone in this room, the young people, Lord, those who are a little bit older, God, how you use us to reach out and how you use us to minister to others, and we need to be refreshed. And so I just pray, Lord, this morning that God, as we get into your word, it's not my words, definitely nothing special about me, but God, your word is powerful and you illuminate it for our lives. And so I pray that you'll help us to hear it, and not just hear it, but hear it and be doers. And I pray these things in your name. Amen. So Matthew chapter 5.
Sorry, Steve.
Oh, go ahead.
I've got the mic.
Oh, perfect.
Unless you don't need it started.
No, well, I'm okay as long as but we'll put it on. That works.
Sorry about that.
No, that's good. That's better. So Matthew 5, and we're going to start in verse 10. So, there you go. Wow. Matthew 5, verse 10 is where we're starting. These are all the words of Jesus. This is a Sermon on the Mount. Many people are really familiar with this passage. All the blessings that it starts out with. So Jesus is teaching. Even before I read, I'll say this. It's so refreshing for people who are hearing this. So people who are hearing this are refreshed, because Jesus says right before this in verse 1 and 2 of 5, he's with the multitudes, he's walking with them, he goes up to teach, the disciples are there, and what they're hearing is refreshing because it's different from what they've heard before from religious leaders who have their own angle for the people all the time. Blessed is the poor in spirit, those who realize they really need God. Blessed are those who are meek. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst after righteousness. But then we get to verse 10. This is where I'm going to start this morning. And in verse 10, you see Jesus starting to set an attitude, I think. So he says, blessed are those who have been persecuted for the sake of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when people insult you and persecute you and falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me. Rejoice and be glad, for your reward in heaven is great. For in this same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you. So I'm going to keep going, but right away it's like, okay, blessed are those who are persecuted. So it's like, okay, who is blessed? Well, those who are persecuted. And that doesn't seem like, wait a minute, I don't feel blessed when that happens, God. But those who are persecuted for Christ, meaning those who are living for him, those who have a faith that's not hidden, I would almost put it, blessed are those who are persecuted who have an active faith. It's really those people who have an active faith. And in this world, I think it's really evident quickly that if you're not on board with the system of this world, okay, when hostility is coming your way, you're clearly against what the world is going. You're doing what Christ wants you to do, and so you're going to experience persecution. I was talking to a young person, was recently preaching in California this summer, and there was a girl who was there. She was a high school student, and I was talking to her after one of the sessions. And she's in a really, really hostile area towards Jesus. Northern California is like really tough. And so she came up to me and she was like, I know what you're talking about. And I said, what do you mean? She said, Pastor Mayo, she said, we get it every day at high school. And I said, what do you mean? She said, well, we get it on social media when people find out we're Christians. We get it from teachers, how we're treated, once they find out that we're believers. She said she had her Bible on her desk. And a teacher in her science class walked up in her class and just put a book on top of her Bible. It was by a guy by the name of Richard Dawkins. Richard Dawkins is like an atheist, like to the hilt. And he wrote a book called The God Delusion. So the teacher just put it on her Bible and kind of looked at her and said, hey, you might want to read this, and then walked away. And so she said it, and I was like, man, but the Bible says, blessed are we when we deal with, persecution, or when we deal with evil against us falsely, because our reward in heaven is great. And I know we don't like persecution, but a lot of times that's when the church really grows, is when persecution comes. I'll read you this real quick. In AD 33, there were 500 followers of Jesus. So this is like, just a few, right after Jesus, was crucified and buried and ascended. But then if you look, by 350 AD, so 300 years later, there were almost 31 million followers of Jesus. So if you look, man, like 300 years later, but we would say, man, that was some of the most like intense persecution or intense time, hard to be a Christian, but the church is growing. And so it says, blessed are you in those times because the church is growing and you're doing my work. So I always say, blessed are you when that happens. But I always say, but what the Bible doesn't say, though, it does not say, blessed are you for being weird. And sometimes I talk about this a lot, but Christians can do, things that are like God didn't call us to do. I was reading this story. This story was also in California, and some of you might say, well, of course, now I know it's going to be weird because it's about California. But these people were in San Diego, and they were on the beach, and they were right at the waterfront. And so there's a boulevard and a boardwalk. And so these people decided that they were going to take mustard and take off all their clothes and put mustard on their body. I kid you not. And they were going to run up to people, and this is exactly what they did for like 20 minutes. They were going to run up to people and just shake them and say, you just need to have faith as a mustard seed and you can be saved. And they started doing this for like 20 minutes. And then after 20 minutes, you can probably guess what happened. They got arrested, which is good. They should have got arrested. And so they got arrested and they were taken away. And they got an interview. One of the people interviewed the lady, like either when she was getting arrested or at the police station. And she said, hold on, I'll mess this up. She said, this is unjust. And we are followers of Jesus. And we are being persecuted for righteousness' sake. And I would say, no, you're being persecuted for being weird and doing illegal things. So it doesn't say, blessed are you for being weird. But it does say rejoice, which, again, is not my first reaction. I'll say, like, a lot of times I feel like I got a 7th year senior in Rejoicing 101. And it says, be exceeding glad, which is also sometimes not, our reaction. But it reminds us that we're following Jesus, whether it's at your work, when you're following Jesus, whether it's, when you invite someone or when you're just living your life sometimes, even in this whole, like, trying to stay away from this whole being, on one side or the other in this whole election thing is crazy, and trying to give an answer that, will be a good answer, continue to bring someone to Jesus and not offend. It seems like everything you say these days offends someone. But, it's like 2 Timothy 3:12 says it says, in fact, everyone who wants to live a godly life in Christ Jesus will be persecuted. And so we have to remember that, and remember that if our faith is active, we have an active faith, and active faith will also face opposition. Okay, and active faith will face opposition. And so we have to remember that as well. And opposition is different from, like, I was telling someone, you know, sometimes we talk to people and they don't want to hear about Jesus, and you realize, okay, this is not the moment. Or recently, like I was just in the airport, and you kind of talk to someone and you're feeling out. It's like, okay, you can tell by how they're receiving you, how they're saying, like, this is not the moment. Or I talk and preach to a lot of different groups of young people, and sometimes you realize, especially if it's an outreach, that, you know, okay, like I've sown this seed, but this is as far as it's going to go, and you have to be okay with that. And sometimes, but I always say that's life. Like, that's not persecution. Sometimes, you know, they don't want to receive you, or like not everyone's going to think you're cool or hip, or, you know, like, oh, I can't wait to hear this. My son, I told you I was preaching in California. My son was with me, and he said to me, we were walking, and he said, Dad, he said, I didn't know aura was a thing. He said, Dad, your outfit's not really giving off any aura. So I was like, okay. I was like, what does that mean? He's like, yeah. He's like, some of the kids here were like, man, you know, we like listening to him, but he, you know, his outfits, he doesn't really have any aura. And I was like, I don't even know what that means. Like, I thought we were still on swag, but apparently I'm like a whole bunch behind. I told him I still have like baggy clothes from the 2000s that I'm hoping will come back around one day, and like I'll be in style again. But and then he said, yeah, he's like, Dad, you're just kind of mid right now. So I was like, wow. I was like, this is great. Like, I'm a mid dad. This is, you know, exactly what I want to hear. Then he said, you really need to get your gear up. And I said, I was thinking in my mind, it's like, do you want to go to college? I was like, because if you don't, like, I could have great outfits like by next week. But it was one of those where, like, you know, even just him talking to some of the kids, they're like, not everyone is always going to think, you know, you're amazing or ever. But that's just life. Like, that's not persecution. To me, persecution was, I was listening, there's a rapper named Dayton. He's from California, and he was talking about how his coworker is in a business setting in a cubicle, and how he just was talking to people about Jesus, and his supervisor came around and said, like, hey, if you continue that, like, you won't have a job here anymore. And so he stopped doing that, and he thought, well, the very least I could do, I'll put up Bible verses like on my little cubicle area and on my computer, and he did that on his computer screen. And 2 weeks later, he was fired, and he's still like in the whole litigation of that. But to me, I was like, no. That's persecution, okay? But the Bible says, and in those moments, like, I don't think anyone, you know, our first reaction is typically like, well, thank you, Lord, I lost my job. Or even, you know, what Dennis shared about Paul, like, he just got up and went right back in the city the next day, you know? It's like, a lot of times our reaction is not praise be to God, but God is reminding us, like, hey, I'm sending you into the world for this reason. The world's not always going to receive you, but take heart because I have overcome the world. And so he's giving us what I call like a kingdom mindset. I'll just read a couple verses real quick. Philippians 1:29 says, for to you it has been granted for Christ's sake not only to believe in him, but also to suffer for his sake. Philippians 3:10 says, this is one of my favorite verses, says that I may know him and the power of his resurrection, which is great because everyone's always loved that part. Like, okay, I'm going to know Jesus and the power of his resurrection. And I'm like, but the second part we don't want to read. It says, but also in the fellowship of his sufferings, being conformed unto his death. Okay, and I was like, oh man, like that's weighty. But it says, like, great is your reward in heaven. And it's almost like the idea of watch what you can do when I'm working through you, even in the midst of persecution. Watch the difference when you have even when you encounter things. And I think it's like, you know, people see you and, you know, I don't know, ladies, they might say like, you know, girl, why didn't you, you know, cuss her out when she said that? Or, you know, they might, for guys, like, guys, why didn't you knock him out when he said that? Or I recently had someone tell me about a situation where they didn't take money that they easily could have, you know, taken in a situation or a job where no one would have knew. And a coworker was like, hey, why didn't you take that? And he was like, you know, and this is maybe Philly slang or whatever. He's like, that's a come up. You know, he was like, man, you didn't take that money? He was like, man, that's a come up. Like, you missed out. And he was like, you know, well, let me tell you why, but that is our opportunity to say like, hey, here's why I didn't do that. Here's why I didn't say that back there. Here's why I didn't do that. Or here's why I didn't take that money. Or I don't know, it could be anything. Here's why, yeah, I got this diagnosis, but I don't look like I'm a wreck because I have peace in Jesus in my life, or this situation's happening in my life and it doesn't seem good to everyone on the outside. But the way I hold it together is because of Jesus, and He gives us that opportunity to say, hey, I'm holding it together because it's not of me. Let me introduce you to someone who helps me do that, and His name is Jesus Christ. I think that's what Jesus is setting in attitude. So then He goes into 13 to 18. He says, you are the salt of the earth. So everybody say salt. Okay, you are the salt of the earth. So Jesus doesn't say you might be salt and you might be, light. We're going to get to that point. But He says you are salt. Okay? You are the salt of the earth. But if the salt has become tasteless, how can it be made salty again? It is no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled underfoot by people. So if you look up salt at this time, salt is used as a preservative, so it's super valuable to preserve meat. You can't just throw meat in the fridge back in those days. Salt is used for trade. Salt is used for fertilizer. Salt was used to pay soldiers. A lot of times they would say like, hey, that soldier's worth their salt. That was like a phrase during that time. But I love it because Jesus is always making like, this is kind of absurd because salt is salt. Like it is salt. It can't not be anything else but salt. And salt is salt until it's not. So it can't change. It can't change its form. As soon as it, does that, it's not salt. Luke 34 and 35 says this. It says, salt is good, but if it loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? It is neither fit for the soil, nor for the manure pile. It is thrown out. So Jesus is saying, hey, listen, you're either a citizen of heaven or you're not a citizen of heaven. Okay? You're either affecting change in an area by how you live, or you're just existing. Like, which one are you doing? You guys are probably used to this. Last winter was my first winter back here after being in Fort Lauderdale for like 16 years. So, I even have a friend who lives up the street, and anytime it snowed or was like ice on the road, like I would be out there like with my sons and we'd be shoveling and scraping. He would literally take a picture of me from his house, and he would take a picture and then like of his phone and then like text it to me. And he'd say, and like in the text, it would be like a picture of me like shoveling, and then underneath it would be like, welcome to the neighborhood. So, but I think about this like, Fort Lauderdale, you don't have to deal with this, but you guys know. As soon as it gets cold and the ice on the roads, everyone what is it? You're looking for salt. You can't even find it in the store you're looking for if you don't get it early. But I always say, as soon as you throw that salt down and give it like 30 seconds, what happens? It starts to work. Right away. I could put salt down on ice, and it took me back this winter to when I was a little kid and lived here before. But like I look down a minute later and I already see like it's starting to make the ice wet. Like salt has an effect. It's a visible effect immediately. And Jesus is saying, listen, are you having an effect in your area? Right? One pastor put it like this. I love how he put it. I'll read it. He said, so if you are claiming Jesus as your Lord and Savior, can you pass the taste test? I thought that's really good. Man, can we pass the taste test? And salt looks a lot of different ways for us. Like there's a guy who, his name is Jim. So Jim this is what salt looks like in my ministry, because I, being back up here, I'm in urban ministry, so right in the city of Coatesville, but I go into Philadelphia a lot. I'm in the prisons often, meeting with prisoners, doing Bible studies and those kind of things, and dealing with families in crisis. But there's a guy who comes in. He's 68 years old. His name is Jim. And Jim comes in every single Monday. He hasn't missed for like months and months. And he comes in and he does a work release Bible study every Monday. He wouldn't miss it for the world. Like he would miss a lot of things, but he would not miss this. And he's faithful, and he just comes in. And the guys are always like, Jim, you come in every week. Are you sure? He's like, no, there's no place I'd rather be than doing this. Jim is like super wealthy. The guys don't know this, but Jim could just play golf like every day for the rest of his life and just, have a great life and chill out. But he doesn't. He decides like with the time that he has, he really wants to make an effect. He comes every week. Even one week he was going to come it fell on his anniversary night. It's Monday night, so tomorrow night we'll be there. It fell on his anniversary. He's like, nah, I'm going to be here. And all the guys were like, Jim, go have it. Like, we want you to keep coming. He's like, if you come on your anniversary, your wife's going to be like, no, you're not coming again. So they're like, Jim. But he's like dedicated. I think, you know, I love it because there's a lot of Christianity that we hear, that's like heard. There's a lot of Christianity, I say, that's blabbed about. But unfortunately, there's not a lot of Christianity that's like lived out. And sometimes there's a lot that's talked about and there's very little Christ-likeness to it. And so, you know, it's that idea of being salt. Even in the movies, I love going to the movies. I haven't gone to movies for a while, but I love going. And one of my favorite things my kids will tell you when I go to the movies is, like, I love sitting in the movies, but I love to get, like, that movie popcorn with the movie theater butter. I tried a million times to replicate it at home. It don't work. I don't know. Maybe you guys can tell me the secret, but it's nothing like it. And I think, this for me, one of the most amazing inventions of the 21st century is that they took, like, the butter thing and they put it on the outside so you can just get as much as you want. It's amazing. So if you ever see me in the movies, I'll be the guy that's just, like, sitting there with, like, the butter under the thing, like arteries clogging with every bite. But if you eat that popcorn, like, what happens? Like 10 minutes into the movie, hey, you're super, super thirsty because the salt in that popcorn has taken effect. And you're like, I need something to drink. But Jesus is telling us to do the same thing. He's like, hey, in your area, people should know about Jesus because of how you are. And we almost, it's almost like our living makes people thirsty for Jesus in that way, you know. And so, you know, I think about the woman at the well. It's like after Jesus had a conversation with her about what living water would be, she was, in a sense, thirsty. She went back and told almost her, like, our whole neighborhood. It's like, hey, come, you know, let me show you a man who told me everything I ever did. Like, you got to meet the Christ. So I always think, I say it like this, you know, who is God asking you to spend time with so that you can help create a spiritual thirst in their life? You know, who is God asking us to spend time with so that we can help create in them a spiritual thirst? Verse 14 says, you are the light, everybody say light, of the world. A city set on a hill cannot be hidden, nor do people light a lamp and put it under a basket, but on a lampstand, and it gives light to all who are in the house. Your light must shine before people in such a way that they may see your good works and glorify your Father which is in heaven. So salt and light. I always think about this. Salt and light are seen and not heard. Okay? Now, I got 3 boys in my house, and sometimes it's crazy. And I'm like, man, we really got to teach them to be salt and light. Because many times I want them to be seen and not heard. Not these ones today. I'm not talking about them. They're amazing. But my 3, yes. But it says, you are a light of the world. So a city set on a hill cannot be hidden. So it's like, how can we live in a way that points people to Jesus? Jesus is teaching on a hill on the Sea of Galilee. It's not really a sea. It's like a big lake. And on the Sea of Galilee, there would be like storms sometimes, and it would be cloudy at certain nights. But you think about it, it's like he's talking to fishermen, okay? Within his specific group, especially Peter, James, John, like these are fishermen. So as he's teaching, there is a city like that was in that area that's the highest on the hill. The city was called Safed. And that city was at the highest point of a city that would give off light around the Sea of Galilee. And it's funny because scholars talk about it. They say, I wonder if Jesus was talking about that and maybe pointing to that city, because if it was cloudy at night on the Sea of Galilee and there's no moon, you know, like there's no stars, there's no way to get your bearings, and Safed was north. And so, like, Jesus is saying, hey, you're like this city, which, fishermen, you guys should get it. If you're on the Sea of Galilee at night and you can't find where you are, where do you look to? Well, just under the clouds is that city, and it's north, which shows you exactly where you are, and then shows you where you need to go. It's where they got their bearings. And I think Jesus in the same way is saying, like, hey, by how you live, if you're a light, are you living in a way that can help people get their bearings in life? You know, are you living in a way that can help people, you know, when they're dealing with the storms of life and they don't know where to turn? Can you be a light to say, like, hey, you know what? Here, let me show you how to get your bearings, because this is where I get my bearings from. You know, we get our bearings from Jesus, and it's like, man, let me show you the one you can get your bearings from, the one who never changes, the one who never moves, the one you can always count on. And if Jesus is the ultimate light, how can we reflect, you know, his light? whether it's your neighbor, or whether it's your friend, or whether it's your coworker, or whether it's your, that crazy young person that you're trying to talk to. I got 3 in my house, so, it's like, who is that person? I was talking about speaking at that camp in California. So I was speaking at the camp in Cali, and one time I was there. Normally I go for a week, and sometimes I go for 2 weeks. So I was there, and as I was speaking for 2 weeks one time, you have to do laundry because you're there for a long time. And my wife is a champion. Like, she did the laundry almost all the time because she knew I was speaking and studying, and so like she was doing the laundry. But there's one time she was like, "Hey, the laundry's in there. Can you go get it?" And I was like, "Sure, I'll go get it." So the laundry is like in a far remote part of camp, like way up a hill. So I have to walk around and walk up this hill, and it was dusk. So I was about to walk out, and I'm looking, I'm like, "Hey, do you think I need a flashlight?" And she's like, No. She's like, "There's big light posts all the way. I've been doing this all week. Just go up and get it." So I was like, "Okay, cool." So I start to walk up, walk out camp, walking way across the section. I'm starting to walk up, and so I'm going up this hill. It's like 15 minutes later. It's really starting to get dark, and like the first major light post that's supposed to show me where I'm supposed to go is out. Hey, this light post is out, so I'm like, great. I already can't see. Like, I've been to this part one time, but I really don't know where I'm going, and so I keep walking up this hill. And it's like 10 minutes later. I'm walking up this hill. I'm like, I don't know where I'm going, and it's getting dark. And all of a sudden, you start to hear like all these noises, and I'm like, all right, this is not good. Like, I hear noises, like I don't know where I'm at. I was joking with someone. I was like, I don't know if you guys ever seen like those. It's almost Halloween, so they always, all the channels always play like those scary movies. But I was telling someone, like, if you ever watch any scary movie, like just keeping it real, black people die in like the first 2 minutes of all of them. Like, we last like 1.5 seconds with the worst lines like ever. Like, we're just out. So I was like, this is great. Like, we're the ones who go out first. So I'm walking up this hill. There's just no light. I'm trying to find where I'm at. It's super dark, and I'm going up, and I'm like, all right, well, it's good. I had a good life. I had 3 kids. Like, it was great. Like, I don't know what's going to I'm walking up here, and then all of a sudden, right out of the, like, I didn't even see this girl come up. There was one of the girls who was a counselor, and she had one of those, like, huge, big, like, almost like big spotlight handheld flashlights. And she turned it on, like, right when she got close to me, it's like, Poof. And she turned it on, I was like, whoa. And as soon as she put the light on, like, I knew exactly where I was at. And I was like, wow, this is crazy. She said, yeah. And she said, first thing she says to me, what are you doing up here without a flashlight? I was like, yeah, long story. But she showed me where to go. And the main thing is like, her light immediately helped me see. And actually, I was still on the paved area, but I was going the wrong way. Without her, like, I would have continued to go the wrong way. I needed her light. I think Jesus is reminding us, like, hey, where is your light? Because, this is probably and it's not just this election in the United States, but this could be the greatest time in our lifetime, which, is a moment for us to really, share the gospel with people. Like, this time could be the greatest opportunity to get the gospel out. And the church, should be the group that, like, rises and shines for Jesus. So, almost finished. An active faith to me is an encouraging faith. I just want to read verse 16 again. It says, your light must shine before people in such a way that they may see your good works and glorify your Father who is in heaven. John 15:8 says it like this. But by this my Father is glorified, that you bear much fruit, so distinguishing yourselves as his disciples. And I say, when we live in a way that lets Jesus shine, it illuminates him. When we live in the right way, we're light bearers, but we're really reflecting his ultimate light. And it's a good reminder. It's like, do we live in a way that inspires others to live for him? And do we really want to be doers of the word and not just hearers, but like truly doers of what he says? When we first moved, it was just my wife and I. We moved from Fort Lauderdale from Pennsylvania here down to Fort Lauderdale. And I've been going to like Ocean City, Maryland, Ocean City, New Jersey for a long time. So we moved down, and I was like, this is amazing. As much as people told me about the beaches, and then we went to the Bahamas too, and I was like, this is even better. As much as we told about the beaches and all that stuff, was like, this is phenomenal. Okay, I realized I was taking my life in my hands every summer at the Jersey Shore, because you can't see what's under there in that darkness. But we got there. It's like, this is so much more amazing. I'm so glad like we actually did it and not just watched it or saw it. And it's like, I think a lot of times the church, people come and they're like, we almost trick ourselves. It's like, no, we're being prepared to go out. We're being prepared to go out. But sometimes we don't engage like we should. And it's almost like I tell people, if you're going to, someone said, hey, you're going to go to a seminar next week on what the beach is. Or even in this room, hey, show up next week right here. We're going to have a whole seminar on what the beach is. We're going to just go through a PowerPoint, teach you about the beach. And then this next week, we're going to show up and go. So, you show up the first week, you hear about the sand, you hear about the water, you hear about the characteristics, and you're ready. And then the next week you show up and the instructor's like, hey, is everyone ready to go? And it would be like all the people saying, hey, no. Hey, listen, instructor, sorry. Maybe you're confused. Like, we just want to sit in this room again and like hear about the beach from you. Because when you talk about it, the sand seems so great and the water seems so amazing, and it would be so amazing. And imagine if every week the people showed up and they were like, the instructor's ready to go, but they're like, no. We just want to sit in this room and have you talk about it again, because it sounds so good when you talk about it. Like, we would think that's crazy. Like, well, who would do that? Like, you're being prepared to go to the beach. But sometimes as the church, that's what we do. Like, we show up in church, and we show up in church, and we show up in church. And God's like, hey, no, I want you to go out so you can not just experience it, but also so you can do what I'm asking you to do. And we're like, but no, Pastor, we just want to listen to you talk. It sounds so good when you talk about, live for Jesus, when you talk about evangelism. But God's saying, like, no, I'm calling you to go out. And we need to remember, like, hey, God's calling us to get involved. God's calling us to not just hear about it, but to be doers. And remember that, like, an active faith is focused on eternity. So if an active faith is focused on eternity, we want to do something that's going to make a difference for eternity. Not that it'll be easy all the time, but it'll be the best thing. I was watching the Olympics. Anyone watch the Olympics this summer? You guys watch any Olympics? I love the Olympics. I used to run track and field, and now I'm old. So when I go and race my sons, I'm like, man, I don't have not what I used to be. But all those people are remembered. We remember like Michael Phelps, in the pool. Or we remember, some of the, Simone Biles, or all the people that, are just amazing. But I always say, like, we'll remember them, and not that what they did is like inconsequential, but Jesus isn't going to be impressed that Michael Phelps has the most Olympic medals, and Simone Biles is amazing, or you pick your person. But imagine if we could be remembered for something that truly mattered for eternity. And we live a lot of times for, I don't know if you guys have ever seen this example. The great pastor Francis Chan does it all the time, but he takes a rope and he lays it all the way across from end to end in a room. And he'll take one end of the rope and he'll pick it up and he'll just take a magic marker and just color that end of the rope. And I'll say, like, this, the end of the rope, this that I just color with a magic marker black, that's like your life. He's like, and the rest of it is eternity. You say, but we spend a lot of times living for that little, like, tiny dot on the end of the rope instead of using our lives and say, like, hey, what's going to matter for eternity? And God's called us all to do something with, who we are. 1 Peter 4:10-14 says this. Each one should use whatever gift he has received to serve others faithfully, administering God's grace in its various forms. If anyone speaks, he should do it as one speaking the very words of God. If anyone serves, he should do it with the strength God provides, so that in all things God may be praised through Jesus Christ. And I'll kind of close with this, because he's calling God's, again, in light of persecution, in light of what we could face, we're being reminded to have an attitude of joy because the kingdom is being advanced. We're being called to be salt and light. And again, for ourselves, be refreshing to other people. We'll point people to Jesus. But one of the stories that came to my mind, so I was working, and when I was in college, the first couple of years, I was working in Ocean City, Maryland, as a waiter. I think his restaurant's still here, Jim. Go all the way to the end in right in Ocean City, Maryland. There's a crab house called Hooper's Crab House, and I was a waiter there for a couple years. And the first couple weeks of the summer, as a waiter there, I just remember, doing my thing. I wasn't really super vocal for Jesus. I wasn't doing anything I wasn't supposed to do. But I remember then this guy came, and he was like really talking to people about Jesus. He was like really like, hey, here's who I am about my faith. He was very active. And after a couple weeks of watching him, I remember talking to him. I was like, hey, I'm a Christian also. And I'll never forget what he said, because it was like it kind of, it stung like salt in a wound. He said, oh. And it's after him being there for a couple weeks, he said, oh. He's like, that's great. But he looked at me and says, I didn't know. And that was like, I was like, man, that's hard to take. Because like, I didn't know. But everyone knew, from the moment he got there. And it was one of those, it's like, man, I never wanted to hear ever again someone say that, like about you, like, hey, I didn't know that you were a follower of Jesus. And it's just a good reminder, like, hey, maybe, for so many reasons in life, we as, people who live life for a while know, like, your life, there can be seasons of life that are easier, seasons of life that seem sweeter, some that seem tougher, some that are harder. And sometimes your light kind of grows dim, depending on what you're walking through. But, someone reminded me there, like, hey, life, our life is so short, and what really counts is for eternity. And sometimes day by day can seem like forever, but you're really walking through an illusion that like gaining all this stuff matters, or what these people's opinion of, it's like really all that matters is what Jesus has called you to do. And so I just want to encourage you guys. I mean, even from watching all of the things that are coming up for you, it seems like there's a lot that y'all are going to do. So I'll be praying for all those outreaches. But I just want to encourage you guys, like wherever you're at, from whether it's a church thing or whether it's like your personal thing, just continue to be that light. Like continue to be that group of people that says like, hey, we're going to make a difference in our area for Jesus. And I always say like, God, it's not just the pastors or professional Christians, like the whole, area is not like Dennis. If you don't do it, like, God's like, I always say like, we're God's plan. Okay? We are the church is God's plan. Okay? And sometimes you look around, like sometimes I'm in my church, I look around like, Lord, I don't know if this is a good plan. Because you're like, but God's like, you know what? He's called this group of people together, like not me. It's his group of people, and it's not like a bunch of professional Christians coming in the door next week that are gonna like, he's like, no, I'm calling like you to do it, not just the pastor, but I'm calling you to be a light. I'm calling you to minister in your area. And there's times where you're gonna feel great, and there's times where you're dealing with things and you feel like you're not effective, but it's really just God who brings the increase. So we continue to go. I know a lot of days I'm like, I'm God's plan. Like, I don't know how that's going to work because I feel like a mess. But even in the midst of it, even when I feel like a mess, I'm his mess. And, I know God's going to continue to, use me in that way. And so, I don't know who it is. I don't know if it's like someone you have on your heart, or like, Pastor Dennis was talking about in the beginning, someone you haven't talked to for a while, or someone you work with, or someone that's in your neighborhood. But I just encourage you guys, like as you dive into, especially in this season, is a perfect season from all the different holidays and events. There's so many ways to bring people out. I just encourage you guys to continue to keep going, and to just encourage you that like, God is doing a great work. Even just for me watching like all the young ones like grow up in Jesus in a sense right here is so encouraging. It's really, really encouraging because they are like learning the gospel right before you, learning what it means, learning about Jesus, learning what it means to live for Jesus. So I just encourage you to continue. And when God gives you the opportunity, that you don't shy away, that we jump in as salt and light. It can be scary. I told someone, I hear from all-time young people, they're like, I'm so bored. I'm bored. I'm like, if you're bored as a Christian young person, it's because you're a spectator and not a participant. I was like, so I said, really, God's calling you to get off the sideline, because if you go witness to 5 people tomorrow, it might be a lot of things. Okay? You might get received, you might get cursed out, you might get but it won't be boring. Okay? I tell them like, it will not be boring. Like the butterflies in your stomach that come up before you talk to someone about Jesus or before you invite them to church. It's like God's calling us not to be spectators. He's calling us to be participants. And so he's calling us to be salt and light, and hopefully with his grace and his strength, we can do that. So I just want to encourage you guys again to continue to do what you're doing. Don't pray.